Okay, so I want to start today by asking you to look for a ghost.
A ghost, that's a slightly spooky way to kick off a deep dive on agriculture. I thought we were talking about farming, not the paranormal.
Bear with me here. I want you to close your eye. Well, unless you were driving, please keep your eyes on the road, and I want you to conjure up a mental image of a farmer. Capital F, the stock photo version. What do you see?
Okay, I'll play. I see a man, definitely a man, probably wearing a plaid shirt, maybe a baseball cap. He's sitting on a massive green tractor looking out over a perfectly straight ocean of corn or wheat. Maybe he's checking the weather on an iPad.
Exactly. That is the exact image we all have. It's the image in commercials and movies in our heads. But here's the thing. If we look at the actual data, the global reality of who is actually feeding the human population, that guy on the tractor is the
He
minority.
really is, yeah.
The real, actual majority farmer is invisible to most of us in the West, and that is what I mean by ghost. So today, we're going to try to make that invisible workforce visible.
I love that framing because the source material we are diving into today, research focused on cultivating equality, it completely upends that stereotype. We are looking at the critical and often totally invisible role women play in the global food system. And I want to be clear right off the bat, this isn't just a social commentary. This is hard economics.
Right. The mission here isn't just to say, hey, women farm too. We are looking at sources ranging from AP human geography concepts to broad demographic research, and they are making a much louder, much more urgent argument.
They are. The core argument is about efficiency. The research suggests that the single biggest lever we can pull to solve global hunger isn't, a new genetically modified seed, and it isn't a bigger tractor. It is simply acknowledging and empowering the women who are already doing the work.
Which is just a massive aha moment right at the top. We are literally leaving food on the table because of how the system is designed.
Precisely. The data shows that if you close the gender gap in agriculture, if you just gave women the same resources as men, agricultural productivity would skyrocket. We are talking about feeding millions more people just by fixing this one systemic inefficiency.
So let's get into the machinery of this. Because obviously, women in agriculture isn't a monolith. A woman farming in Iowa is facing a totally different reality than a woman farming in Kenya. The sources make a big distinction here based on geography.
Right. To understand this, we have to borrow a lens from geographers, the difference between the core and the periphery.
Okay, let's define those quickly for the listener who maybe hasn't opened a geography textbook since high school.
Sure. Broadly speaking, the core refers to developed, wealthy, industrialized nations. Think the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Japan. The periphery refers to developing nations, largely in the global south, so parts of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where economies are less industrialized and often rely a lot more on subsistence.
And the role of women flips depending on which side of that line you're standing on. Geography is destiny here.
It really is a stark inversion. If you look at the periphery, those subsistence economies, women make up roughly 50% of the agricultural workforce.
Half.
Half. In some specific regions, it's much higher, which we will get to. But if you hop over to the core, the commercial economies like the U.S., that number drops to about 33% or lower.
That is a pretty significant drop. So in the developing world, it's basically a coin flip, 50-50. But I want to drill down on what workforce actually means here, because 50% participation doesn't mean 50% of the power, does it?
No, and that is the crucial distinction. In the periphery, participation usually means manual labor. We're talking about the physical act of planting seeds, weeding rows by hand, harvesting crops with a machete or sickle. It is high sweat, high effort, back-breaking work.
Whereas in the core, in the U.S., for example.
The role shifts. In developed nations, women are less likely to be the ones physically tossing hay bales, though some certainly do, and they're more likely to be involved in agribusiness management, bookkeeping, marketing, or executive decision-making.
Wait, so why the drop? Why did developed nations see such a decline in women physically farming? Is it just that we have other jobs, or is there something else going on?
It's actually more mechanical than that.
Right.
It is the mechanization factor.
Right.
Think about the Industrial Revolution. Before tractors and combines, farming was a family unit activity.
Right.
Everyone worked the field because you needed every hand.
Right, it was all hands on deck.
But when heavy machinery was introduced, two things happened. First, the need for sheer volume of human labor dropped. You didn't need 10 people to harvest a field, you need one guy and a machine.
Okay, that makes sense.
But secondly, and this is the cultural layer, historically in the West, machinery was coded as men's work. The Industrial Revolution didn't just bring engines, it brought a societal shift called the cult of domesticity. It defined the female sphere as the home and child-rearing, while the male sphere became mechanized production and the public workspace.
Ah, so the tractor didn't just replace the horse, it culturally pushed the woman out of the field.
Exactly, it solidified a divide. So as the West got richer and more mechanized, women were statistically pushed out of the agricultural count. They were still there, often doing the books or managing the household, but they weren't considered farmers in the same way.
That explains the core. But the periphery, the developing world, didn't undergo that same level of mechanization, so the women stayed in the fields.
They had to. In subsistence agriculture, you don't have the luxury of separate spheres. You eat what you grow. You need every calorie of energy expended to get a calorie of food out of the ground.
Let's zoom in on that reality, because subsistence agriculture is a term we throw around, but I want to make it visceral for the listener. What does that actually look like for a woman in, say, sub-Saharan Africa?
It looks like the backbone of survival. In sub-Saharan Africa, women provide between 60 and 80% of the labor for food crops.
Wait, 80%? That isn't a contribution, that's the whole industry.
It is, and usually this takes the form of mixed crop and livestock farming.
Which means what exactly?
It means a diversified system. They aren't growing 500 acres of just soybeans for export. A woman might be cultivating maize and cassava to make flour, while also managing chickens for eggs, and maybe some goats for milk, all within a small radius of the homestead.
So she is essentially running a complex, multi-species biological factory to keep her immediate family and village alive.
Correct. And she is doing it largely by hand, often while caring for children at the very same time.
This brings us to the statistic from the source material that I honestly had to read 3 times to believe. It's from the data on the Republic of the Congo.
I had a feeling you were going to bring this one up. It is the most striking example of the disparity we are talking about.
Okay, listener, get ready for this. In the Republic of the Congo, the data says women are responsible for 75% of the country's total agricultural output. 3/4 of all the food grown in the entire nation comes from women.
Yes, that is the figure.
But, and this is the part that breaks my brain, they are largely legally barred from owning the land they farm.
It is a profound contradiction that defines the struggle in many parts of the periphery. You have this massive responsibility placed on women to feed the nation. You must grow 75% of our food. But the legal system says you cannot own the resource needed to do it.
It's responsibility without authority.
And without security. Think about it in business terms. Imagine trying to run a factory where your landlord could kick you out at any moment and you aren't allowed to buy the building. You wouldn't invest in a new roof, would you? You wouldn't buy expensive long-term equipment.
Because you could lose it tomorrow.
Exactly. This land tenure issue creates a cycle of low productivity. Because women can't own the land, they can't use it as collateral. If they can't use it as collateral, they can't get credit from a bank. No credit means no money for fertilizer, high-yield seeds, or better tools.
So when we see reports saying productivity is lower in these regions, it's not because the women don't know how to farm. It's because they are farming with one hand tied behind their back.
They are farming with zero capital in a system designed to keep them that way, and yet they are still producing the majority of the food. It is remarkably resilient, but incredibly inefficient for the economy overall.
That is just infuriating, but it clarifies why the mission of this deep dive is economic. Giving them rights isn't just nice, it would explode the food supply.
Exactly right.
Now, I want to nuance this a bit, because the developing world isn't just one big monolith either. The sources point out that culture plays a huge role in which jobs women are allowed to do. It's not always just women do all the farming.
Right. We can't paint the entire periphery with one brush. It heavily depends on the type of agriculture.
The example that stood out to me in the notes was pastoral nomadism. This is the herding culture, right?
Yes, where communities move with their livestock, camels, cattle, sheep, to find pasture. A great example from the sources is the Maasai people in sub-Saharan Africa.
So how does the gender split work there? Because in the mixed crop farming we just talked about, women are doing 80% of the work. Is it the same for the herders?
Not quite. In Maasai culture, cattle are not just food. They are currency. They are status. They are wealth. And because cattle represent the bank account, the ownership and management of the cattle is almost exclusively the domain of men.
So when the asset is high value, the men control it.
Historically, yes. Women in these cultures are often restricted to what the source calls lower-order tasks. They might milk the cows, or they might process the milk into cheese or butter, but they do not own the herd.
It's a power dynamic. In crop farming, the woman is the star of the show because the food is for eating. In pastoralism, the animal is for wealth, so she is sidelined.
It highlights that you can't just look at economics. You have to look at cultural tradition. Who is allowed to hold the wealth is often a completely different question than who is doing the work.
That is such a key distinction. Okay, I want to pivot back to the core for a minute, back to the US and Europe, because we said earlier that mechanization pushed women out. But the source material suggests there's a bit of a core comeback happening.
There is. The tides are shifting. That old McDonald image of the male-only farmer is eroding, even here in the West.
Where are we seeing this? Is it just women driving the big tractors now, or is it something else?
It is actually more specific. We are seeing a significant rise in women taking leadership roles in specific sectors, namely organic farming and specialty crop production.
Interesting. Why those sectors? Why not the big commodity corn and soy fields?
A few reasons. One is barriers to entry. Industrial commodity farming requires massive acreage and millions of dollars in equipment. It's a bit of a good old boys club that is incredibly hard to break into if you don't inherit the land. But organic and specialty crops, think vegetables, herbs, flowers, artisanal products, often rely on smaller plots of land.
It's high value, lower acreage.
Exactly. It requires more attention to detail, more sustainability practices, and often involves direct-to-consumer relationships, like farmers markets. It is a space where women are finding a foothold and expanding it into leadership.
And we are also seeing a correction in the data regarding family farms, right?
Yes, this is a bit of a "we are finally counting correctly" moment. For decades, if a husband and wife ran a farm, the census listed the man as the operator and the woman as well. Nothing. Or maybe a helper.
Even if she was doing all the accounting, the logistics, and half the harvesting.
Right. Now, with better data collection and a cultural shift, more women are being recognized as principal operators. So the numbers in the core are creeping up, not necessarily because women suddenly started farming, but because we finally started counting them as bosses.
They were always there, we just stopped ignoring them.
Precisely.
Okay, so we have looked at the who and the where. Now I want to look at the what. Because when we say agriculture, I think most of us just think about planting a seed in the dirt. But the deep dive source material breaks the food system down into 3 functional roles, and women are critical in all of them.
Right. The food system is much bigger than just the field. The source categorizes women's contributions into production, distribution, and consumption.
Okay, production is what we have been talking about. Planting, weeding, harvesting.
Correct. That is the manual labor or the machine operation, but then you have distribution. And in the periphery especially, women are the absolute engines of the local economy here.
Talk to me about that. What does distribution look like if you don't have a massive fleet of refrigerated trucks?
It looks like the local market. Women are usually the ones taking the surplus crops, the eggs, the milk, and selling them. They are the retailers, the marketers, and the logistics managers of the village.
And there's a preservation aspect to this too, right?
It's huge. If you harvest 1,000 pounds of cassava, it does you no good if it rots in a week. Women manage the drying, the storage, the processing to ensure that food lasts through the hungry season. If production is about growing food, distribution is about making sure it's actually available to eat when you need it.
That makes total sense. Then we have the third pillar, consumption. Now, this one sounds passive, like just eating, but the source calls women the gatekeepers. That implies power.
It is a massive power. In almost every culture globally, women dictate family nutrition. They decide what is purchased, what is cooked, and what is put on the plate.
So they are the chief nutrition officers of the household.
Exactly. And this connects back to agriculture because a woman's ability to influence that nutrition is directly tied to her access to lands and tools.
How so? Connect the dots for us.
Well, think about it. If a woman knows her family needs more green vegetables for vitamins, but the only land the family has is controlled by the husband, and he wants to grow a cash crop like tobacco or cotton to sell.
Then the family doesn't eat vegetables.
Right. Or if she wants to buy them at the market, she needs income. The research shows a direct correlation. When women have income, when they control the cash from those market sales, child nutrition goes up. When men control the income, it doesn't always correlate as strongly with family nutrition.
So if you want to fix malnutrition, you need to put money or land in the hands of the gatekeeper.
Correct. You cannot separate the legal rights of the woman from the health outcomes of the child. It is a direct line.
This brings us to the urban agriculture phenomenon the source mentions. Because it seems like women are finding workarounds to these barriers. They aren't just waiting for the laws to change.
No, they are resilient. Look at rural India, or even the outskirts of major cities in the global south. Women are managing intense home gardens.
These aren't just hobby flower
I
beds.
know, these are survival plots. Vegetables, small livestock right there in the backyard. It's a way of saying, okay, the system won't let me own the big field, so I'm going to maximize this 500 square feet of dirt right here.
It's incredibly resourceful. But as we wrap up, I can't help but feel frustrated by it. It feels like we are celebrating resilience when we should be fixing the system that requires so much resilience in the first place.
That is the ultimate takeaway here. The resilience is admirable, but the inefficiency is tragic. The expert synthesis from these sources is very clear. We are leaving massive potential on the table.
The mission we talked about at the start, solving global hunger,
Sustainable agriculture and global food security are inextricably linked to removing these barriers. You simply cannot feed a population of 8 or 9 billion people while holding back 50% of your workforce.
it's like trying to run a marathon with one shoe.
Exactly. We need to move from allowing women to farm to actively empowering them with the same rights, credit, and technology that men have had for centuries. The moment you give a woman in the Congo land rights, her productivity goes up, her family's nutrition goes up, and the country's GDP goes up. It is a win-win-win.
So to recap the journey for you listening, we went from the myth of the man on the tractor to the reality of the woman in the field. We saw that in the periphery, women are doing up to 80% of the work, often without land rights.
We saw that culture can sideline them, like with the Maasai cattle, or push them into specific niches, like organic farming in the U.S.
But ultimately, we saw that they are the gatekeepers of the world's nutrition.
And that empowering them is the smartest economic move a nation can make.
I want to leave everyone with a final provocative thought. Something to explore on your own that comes directly from that shocking stat we discussed. We know that in the Republic of the Congo, women produce 75% of the food without land rights.
Right.
So here is the question. What would the global food supply look like? How much more abundant would our world be if those legal barriers simply vanished tomorrow? If the people doing 75% of the work actually had 100% of the support?
That is a world-changing question, and it's one that suggests hunger is a solvable problem if we are willing to change the social structures.
Something to think about next time you are walking through the produce aisle? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Always a pleasure.